My name is Alex Howard. For nearly 20 years, I've been a therapist here in London. I am deeply passionate about helping people make real, positive change in their lives. Having been through therapy myself at different stages of my own life, I know how transformative it can be. That's why I started In Therapy, a series that follows the stories of brave participants as they go on therapeutic journeys with me. Join us as we go behind the scenes as people grapple with issues like depression, anxiety, and chronic illness, and join my mission to break the stigma around mental health and asking for help. This is In Therapy with me, Alex Howard.
My name's Dave, I'm 46. The reason I wanted to come to therapy is just because I'm not too happy with the way my life is at the moment, so I wanted to change that. I've had a sort of fairly tough time over the last couple of years. A lot of it probably stems from when I was in my early 20s, I had a series of strokes which left me with certain disabilities. About 10 years ago, I had a series of disappointments, financial jobs, stuff like that. I got very depressed and was on antidepressants for a while. And at that point I used therapy as a way of sort of coming off the antidepressants and just exploring a few of the reasons why I was feeling depressed. That kind of really helped me at the time. And then for about 10 years, I've kind of been okay. I've had peaks and troughs where I've been, I wouldn't say happy, but happier. But then at the start of this year, I was feeling really depressed, I was feeling really down. I was thinking some very dark thoughts and, I was consciously staying away from the platform edge on the tube and stuff like that. It was like, I wasn't going to do anything, but I wasn't thinking completely clearly. Yeah, I just wasn't happy, I wasn't in a good place. I still think people are judged for the way they feel or for talking about the way they feel, or for coming forward and sort of saying, look, I'm not very happy at the moment, And I think that's especially true of men. Coming from where I do, I think there is that kind of culture that, boys don't cry, and it's for want of a better term, it's that sort of, you don't talk about your emotions and you don't talk about the way you're feeling and you don't talk about feeling depressed. The family and friends thing I've got sorted. It's the love, relationships, money, happiness part, job, that kind of thing. That's the kind of stuff that I'm unhappy with, and that's the stuff I'd like to change.
So David, well, welcome and thank you for entering into this rather strange and bizarre world of being filmed whilst talking about your sort of inner life. I've got a little bit of context and background from Oliver and Rachel in terms of what it was that you wanted to work on, but it sounds like part of it is getting a sense of a sort of clear path and picture in of itself. So it didn't sound like there was a very neat, specific, single thing. It sounded, so it'd be good, I think, to hear a bit from you, just a bit about why you're here, what you would like to get from the time we've got, to see if we can build a bit of a plan together of how we can use the sessions and the time that we've got to hopefully get you somewhere which feels helpful and useful.
I just was in a pretty dark, chaotic place at the start of the year, and figured that therapy would be a good way of sort of trying to get through that. I've got some disabilities. I had a bunch of strokes when I was 21, which left me with certain disabilities.
What are those disabilities?
There's some damage to an area of the brain called the pons varoli, which is sort of like a switchboard in the middle of your brain. It sort of mimics the same symptoms as relapsing, remitting MS. So
Okay.
I was actually misdiagnosed with MS for like 10 years.
Wow.
So I've got a degree of hemiparesis on my left side, so sometimes I just limp, like today. Other times I need to use a stick. Other times I'm completely paralysed. But, I probably had a certain amount of depression because of that.
Yeah.
It's just, and I mean, since lockdown started, I've lost my father, lost my cat.
Was the losing of either a surprise? Obviously, it's always a shock when it happens, but was it a sort of a surprise in terms of timing?
Yeah, and I think lockdown sort of made it worse. Basically, my father was always a very, very vital man. He was very fit. He was 78, and this was the first time he'd ever been ill.
Wow, is that right?
And he was a physiotherapist, and he used to work in football. So he worked for a local football team, and he worked for the SFA, the Scottish Football Association.
Okay.
And used to do the Scotland squad games and stuff like that.
Wow.
And
must have been an interesting life.
Yeah, and sort of toured all around the world. But he also had a day job in the hospital, so he was
kind of grounded by that.
Yeah, so he was very busy, but even into his 70s, he was still working in football. So he was having to keep up with guys who were literally 50 and 60 years younger than him. So he was very, very fit, and sort of probably about this time last year, he started feeling a bit ill and was losing weight, and had a whole bunch of tests done, and they discovered some cancer, and he was due, actually the day lockdown started, or the day after lockdown started, he was actually due to have this cancer operated on, and they'd actually found 3 different cancers, but they didn't think any of them were going to be fatal. They thought they could handle it.
Okay.
And on the morning he was due to have the operation, they just came in and said, it's more extreme than we thought, and we're not going to operate. And because of COVID, there's 2 people in intensive care already with COVID. You wouldn't come out of intensive care. So he was sort of sent home with an appointment for the oncologist. And at that point we were expecting, it'll be chemo or it'll be radiotherapy or something like that.
Yeah.
And the oncologist just came in and went, well, there's absolutely nothing we can do. You have between 7 months and a year. So right there, that was kind of like, almost like a sort of starter for 10. And unfortunately, lockdown had just started, so I was sort of stuck down here, and he was back home in Scotland. I had arranged to come up at the end of June when things had eased up a little bit. And literally the night before I came up, he fell ill and with an infection and was taken out of hospital. So that was on the Thursday night. I came up the Friday night. I managed to wave through the window at him in the hospital on the Sunday, and he was dead on the Wednesday.
Wow.
So that was not the best.
Sure.
At the same time as that, my cat suddenly developed a massive tumour on her head, and she essentially went downhill very quickly. So that was almost emblematic of my father. And then I had 2 friends die of COVID and 1 friend die of suicide. And
these were close friends?
Yeah.
Wow.
And at the moment, I think I was probably, as I say, I was in probably quite a dark place at the start of the year, sort of January, February. And I thought, well, therapy helped me before, I'll try that again. And was looking around for a way of doing that. And, I was feeling, I had a lot of frustration in terms of my job. I had a lot of frustration in terms of, I wasn't in a relationship, still not. And loneliness, things like that. And then, lockdown happened. And weirdly things are probably now worse than they were in January and February. But I probably feel better. I don't know whether that's just having sort of like a windmill to tilt at or something. I don't know.
So you mean the circumstances are worse, but you feel better?
Yeah, oddly. Yeah. You know, it's, you know, at different times, obviously, I have had suicidal thoughts. Weirdly, you know, it's kind of a joke, but kind of not. I've always kind of joked that one of the things that stops me is because my sister keeps having kids. Because I know people who have killed themselves in the past, I've seen and I've experienced the emotional fallout that sort of leaves.
Yes.
And I don't want to kind of inflict that on anyone at any point. When my sister had her first daughter, and I think, well, you know, I can't really kill myself now until she's about 18. You know.
How many kids has she got now?
She's now got 4. Okay. So the youngest are 5. So I'm now like...
You got 13 years.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'll probably be about 60 by then. Well, realistically, will I be arsed then? You know.
Well, you know, also the problem's going to be that the kids are going to start having kids.
Yeah.
So then you're going to be totally stuck. You're going to have grandkids as well.
But yeah. So it's kind of a joke, but it's
a joke, but it's not funny. I understand the point.
Well,
it is funny.
I think it is funny.
It's funny, but I also there's a sort of a pain that's underneath it, right?
But I think it's as good a reason for not doing it as any.
You know, how I look at depression is often it's a myriad of factors that come together at a particular time. So it's normally some events that have happened. It's normally some things within relationships with people. It's normally things within one sort of day-to-day life. There's lots of different ingredients, let's say. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering back then, like either at the time or in the months or sort of year or two leading up, what were some of the things you think that took you to that place?
Some of it's to do with disability. Some of it's to do with, you know, at the time when it happened 10 years ago, I had just lost a job, and I was having difficulty getting a job. Now I'm sort of in employment and just frustrated with the job I'm in. So that's part of it.
What's that frustration? Is it that it's not interesting enough? There's lack of progress, lack of community, lack of purpose. Like what's your sense of?
Yeah,
all of those.
All of those things. I guess it's it can be quite an interesting job, but the progress in it is dependent on factors out with my control.
Okay.
And factors that I don't necessarily see as valid.
Okay. It's very demotivating to be putting a lot of your heart and your energy and your kind of working time into something where the sort of impact of what you're doing is out of your control.
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole model in psychology that's called locus of control, and how much we feel that we can impact the outcomes of what we're working on has a really big impact on our motivation and our mood. Because if we don't feel like what we do has an impact, it's hard to get motivated to do it, in a sense, which sounds like part of what you're feeling. Was that the case? Was that part of what was happening back at the start of the year, or is that a more recent thing that's happened since then?
It was already starting to happen a little bit at the start of the year.
Okay.
It's got worse throughout the year and throughout,
you
know, obviously through the COVID crisis.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. I was feeling quite sad and lonely, you know.
Yeah.
Sad, lonely, and probably underappreciated and not paid enough.
So there's
general malaise, you know.
Yeah, so there's the work piece of feeling like you're not able to be the sort of master of the destiny of what you're doing. Yeah. There's the sense of feeling undervalued, unappreciated, perhaps a lack of sort of progress and direction and evolution. How about other areas of your life? How about intimate relationships, for example?
Well, there wasn't any.
Okay. Had there been? What's been the sort of recent history?
There hasn't been much recent history. I haven't been in a relationship for a few years.
And so the last relationship you were in, how was that?
It was fine, yeah. It kind of sort of died a death, I suppose, and neither of us really sort of admitted that for a while. And then once we kind of broke up, we were still friends, and we had a really nice flat in Dalston, so we continued to share a flat and a cat.
Okay.
So,
how long for?
Yeah, it was a couple of years.
Wow. Wow. And you were sharing a flat and
Yeah.
as friends, but you weren't obviously in a relationship
No.
anymore. Were either of you seeing anyone else, or?
I think so. There was never any kind of sort of jealousy or anything like that on either part.
How about friendships?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like there's been some loss in recent months.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what you have in terms of support and friendships and sort of people that you enjoy spending time with.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm quite lucky when it comes to friends. I have quite a large friendship group. A significant number of those people are people who I think I can open up to when I'm feeling down.
That's great. Yeah.
So
you definitely have emotional support in terms of sort of friendships and sort of kind of community side of your life.
Yeah, I think so.
And you mentioned your sister and sort of, is it nieces and nephews or?
Yeah, 3 nieces and 1 nephew.
Okay. And you're close with them?
Well, as close as you can be when you're, 500 miles away.
Yeah, sure.
Do I think my family know I'm depressed? Yeah. Yes, they do. It's a strange relationship I have. I'm very open with my mother, and I was very open with my father as well when he was alive. Almost through osmosis, my sister knew all this sort of stuff, and she, But yeah, I'm probably not as open with her as I am with my mother or other people. She's my sister, she's my little sister, you don't want to really tell her these things. And she's got 4 kids, she's got enough to be going on with. She's one of these people who's on like Facebook but doesn't interact on Facebook. And she claims never to use it, but she's always looking at it, and she always can tell you what your cousin's done, or, what photos, one of your friends has posted, or, things like that. And, there are those nights where you're a bit pissed at 1 a.m. and you post a song online, or, you listen to some music and you just, I'll just stick it on Facebook or stick it on Twitter or whatever, And then suddenly, you get a phone call from your sister the next day when you're in the pub with a mate, saying, are you okay? And you're like, what's up? Well, you put a 9 Inch Nails song and a Steve Earle song up one after the other at 1 a.m. What's going on with you? And you're like, she obviously knows when I'm feeling depressed, and she obviously is concerned. And, the same goes for my mother and people like that, So there are people who know when I'm feeling bad and are concerned about it.
How about things that you sort of do for sort of recreation and fun and pleasure?
I started out sort of as a screenwriter.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I still do a bit of writing, but a lot of the time now when I'm writing, I'll be doing like reviews and stuff for websites or for journals, so I don't really do...
You mean reviews of other people's writing?
Yeah. And I'm always trying to sort of get back to my own writing and just never really do. And it's one of those things that, everyone was going to write a book over, lockdown.
Yeah.
But, and people talk about, Shakespeare wrote this whenever he was in lockdown. It was like, yeah, but Shakespeare didn't have Netflix and he couldn't watch, he wasn't able to binge watch 5 series of Narcos. So I can, So yeah, I probably do feel bad that I'm not writing something better. But, that's one of the things I do in my spare time.
I mean, have you had times you've been creative and written your own stuff in recent years?
Not for a couple of years, probably.
When you have done, is it something that brings you joy, or is it something that you feel like you're sort of trying to hang on to something that used to bring you joy, or like what?
I don't know if anything brings me joy. That may be another problem. But it definitely is something that feels right.
It strikes me that part of what it sounds like you're feeling is a sort of lack of direction or motivation, or a sort of, there's not a sense of, this is where I'm sort of aiming to get to and sort of moving towards, and a sort of motivation towards that. It feels like there's a level of sort of stuckness and sort of mundaneness and repetitiveness, and there's a sort of absence of enthusiasm in that, in a sense. You said something earlier, which I think you sort of meant flippantly, but I think you also meant it with some sincerity, that about where is joy? Like, I'm sort of curious to hear a bit more about that. Like, where in your life do you feel sort of, it might be fleeting or passing, but moments of joy or pleasure or sort of, kind of enjoyment for life?
Yeah, you'll find most things I say have a mixture of flippant and sincere. And
I'm getting to know it.
And probably that is the thing that brings me joy. It's not really a question I can answer. I don't really know.
So let me ask you a question. Given where your life is at this point now, and looking forward to the next 6 months, 12 months, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what do you want from life? Like, what do you aspire towards? What would you like to be different? What would you like to change?
I want to change my life. I'm not sure how.
It's not just the how, right? It's the what. Like, what would you like to be different? It's then the why of why you're going to change it, and then it's the how, the method of how you get there.
Yeah.
And I think each of those are pieces that I think we can unpack and we can explore together. But I think in some ways, before we look at the how and the why, I think it's getting some clarity on the what. And I think what's often interesting is that the more one unlocks the why, the more alive the what sort of gets. But to unlock the why, we need to get a bit more of a sense of the what, if that makes sense. So looking back at those different areas that we touched on. So there's the area of relationships, there's the area of friends, the area of family, the area of sort of work and career, sort of friends and hobby. There's different sort of categories of your life. I think what would be helpful as a sort of, we can talk about it a bit more now, but I think also as a sort of piece of homework as well, is to almost go through each of those categories a little bit and to sort of assess where you are at the moment. Like, if you were to give each of those categories a sort of score out of 10, like 10 it was like as good as it could be and 0 being it was terrible. Like, I think it would help us just to get a bit more clarity of like where each of those areas are. And then what, if you had the method and you had the how and you had the why, what would you do differently? Like, what would you change in those areas? So it's almost like it becomes a little bit of a life audit in a sense. Okay, well, let's go through the different sort of categories, because I think that will also help us get a bit clearer on, well, where do you actually want to put the energy and the focus? Because you can't necessarily change everything at once. And often the way life goes, as I'm sure you'll know, is that you work on one area and that progresses and moves forwards, but it also tends to impact upon other areas. So for example, let's say you were to have a significant move forward in terms of career. Let's say something exciting opened up. Suddenly you're meeting perhaps, maybe not right now in lockdown, but you're meeting some new people, and then maybe there's new opportunity in terms of relationships. And then you meet someone that's got a hobby you're not really into, but then you get quite into. So it's like often what happens when we've gone through periods of being depressed, or when we've had periods of having a tendency towards feeling a bit apathetic and sort of low mood towards life, is that our life then gets looked at through a certain lens. It's almost like putting on a sort of pair of glasses that makes everything look a bit more bleak and a bit more stuck and a bit more sort of unchangeable. When we change the lens, we start to see opportunity, we start to see potentials in ways that we might not have done before. So I'm going to send you a sort of exercise to do in terms of going through these sort of different areas, rating them, take some time to think about what you potentially would like to happen in those areas. We'll talk about it more next time. It doesn't need to be a complete, perfect piece of homework, because maybe you get so far and you go, I don't really know the answer to that, and we can sort of explore that a bit more together. But I think having that sort of shared roadmap, in a sense, that we sort of go, right, these are the areas we want to put some attention on. I think it's then looking at a bit more of the why, like what is the reason, what is the motivation, and perhaps what's in the way of that. And some of that might be a sense of, well, I don't believe I can do it anyway, or I don't believe it's going to change. So we can look at some of those beliefs around that. And then we can also, over time as well, come into some of the practical tools and strategies that will help that. Because my sort of therapeutic approach is that I think it's really important to take time like we are to get I want to really understand you. And then together, we sort of want to understand where things are and where we want to sort of take things. But knowledge is nice, but it's also the action that creates the change, and having the method and the tools and strategies, and I can teach you certain sort of ways of thinking, ways of accessing certain states, ways of sort of shifting what's happening in your sort of emotions and body. I think all of those things become also part of it, because otherwise you're in danger of having lots of self-awareness, but nothing really gets sort of shifted and changed as a result of that.
Yeah.
How does that sound to you, and what questions do you have for me? I've been spending the last 45 minutes asking you questions, so I'm also very happy to answer questions you've got.
No, I mean, it sounds worth exploring.
Okay, good, good.
You know, I don't really have any questions at the moment. I probably will further down the line.
Yeah, cool. Great. Brilliant. Well, David, I really appreciate it. Thank you for being willing to be part of this as well. I appreciate it. And it's great from our side, particularly to have a man that's willing to do it, because we men don't normally talk about how we feel. So I appreciate you being willing to do that. So thank you.
That was my first session, and it didn't feel artificial to me. It felt quite natural, as much as any kind of therapy conversation ever is. I felt that there was a certain amount of rapport there, and this idea of homework is quite interesting, probably quite a good thing. So we'll see what happens next.
So welcome to season 2 of In Therapy. It feels great to be back, and I really hope you found this week's episode helpful. This is often the starting point in the therapeutic journey, getting some clarity on what it is that we need to work on for things to evolve and move forwards. People often come into the therapeutic journey feeling anxious, or feeling depressed, or feeling lost or overwhelmed in some way. But we need to have clarity on what's going on and what needs to change to then have our roadmap to move forwards. And that's where we've been starting with David. If you'd like to do the homework along with David, please do head over to my Instagram. We're going to have each week, we're going to summarize some of the key lessons of the episodes. We're also going to share exercises that you can do at home to come along on the journey with us. I'm also super excited to be announcing that on Thursdays, we're going to be launching a new podcast. It will be a video podcast here on YouTube, but also an audio podcast on the various podcasting platforms. It's called Talking Therapy, and we're going to be exploring some of the key themes and ideas that come up in these episodes. I was really touched by the numerous comments we ended up having in the end on season 1. People sharing their experiences and asking questions. Replying with 2 or 3 lines didn't really feel it did justice to the sincerity of people's questions and wishes to kind of share and connect. And it feels like this podcast is my way of being more interactive and more in contact with you as the community and supporting you in coming on this journey with us. I should say we are going to be continuing through season 2 to follow the journeys of Hannah, Sally and Lauren, so you'll get to find out what's been going on for them. Here's a taste of what's coming up next week. How have you been doing since last time?
Not well. Just in the last 2 weeks I've just felt really, really fucking guilty about my dad dying. A feeling that I was really, really selfish.
It sounds like there's a lot of self-judgment and sort of attacking, criticising and beating yourself up.